So good morning, everyone. We are in Genesis chapter 15. Last time you guys went through the first 6 verses. We'll just read those, not necessarily dwell on them here. To get more context again, we'll read chapter 15 in its entirety. And we'll see God's blessing to Abraham now that he is going to get back to the business of keeping his promise with Abraham. And Abraham has certainly been unsure of what the Lord has in store. So, without further ado, 15, maybe I'll break it up in half. 1 through 8, a reader, and then 9 through 20. Adrian will take 1 through 8. Sharon will take the next half. All right, thank you.
After these events, the word of the Lord came to Abram in a vision. He said, "Do not be afraid, Abram. I am your shield, your very great reward." Abram said, "Lord God, what can you give me since I remain childless, and the one who will inherit my estate is Eliezer of Damascus?" Abram also said, "Look, you have given me no offspring, so a servant born in my house will be my heir." Just then the word of the Lord came to him. God said, "This man will not be your heir, but instead one who will come out of your own body will be your heir." The Lord then brought him outside and said, "Now look towards the sky and count the stars, if you are able to count them." He said to Abram, "This is what your descendants will be like." Abram believed in the Lord, and the Lord credited it to him as righteousness. He said to him, "I am the Lord who brought you out of Ur of the Chaldeans to give you this land as a possession." He said, "Lord God, how will I know that I will possess it?"
The Lord said to him, "Bring me a heifer 3 years old, female goat 3 years old, a ram 3 years old, a turtle dove, and a young pigeon." Abraham gathered all these, divided them in half, laid the 2 halves across from each other, but he did not divide the birds in 2. Birds of prey came down on the carcasses, but Abram drove them away. When the sun was going down, a deep sleep fell on Abram. Then terrifying deep darkness fell on him. The Lord said to Abraham, "Know this, your descendants will live as aliens in a land that is not theirs, and they will serve its people, who will afflict them for 400 years. But I will surely judge the nation that they will serve. Afterward, your descendants will come out with great wealth, but you will go to your fathers in peace. You will be buried at a good old age. In the 4th generation, your descendants will come here again, because the guilt of the Amorites is not yet full." And when the sun had gone down, and it was dark, suddenly a smoking oven and a flaming torch passed between the pieces. On that day the Lord made a covenant with Abraham. He said, "To your descendants I have given this land, from the river of Egypt to the great river, the river Euphrates. I will give you the territory of the Kenites, the Kenizzites, the Kadmonites, the Hittites, the Perizzites, the Rephites, the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Girgashites, and the Jebusites."
All right, ladies, thank you. So Abraham has rescued his nephew Lot, and things are settling down, and God is reinstating his covenant promise to Abraham. In the look section, just a few notes. Verse 11, it said Abraham drove them away. So, although the Bible does not explain the significance of this, we can see this as an act of faith on Abraham's part. He was driving away things that would keep the promise from being ratified. So, we have the sacrifice that's been made, that God commanded Abraham to make, and we'll have to talk a little bit more about that. I think the editor is just acknowledging that the birds that are in the sacrifice portion are a little confusing. We're maybe not quite sure why they were there. But, yeah. And in verse 16 it mentioned the sin of the Amorites has not reached its full measure. Here, the Amorites in general is a general term for the nations who lived in Canaan. These descendants of Canaan, Ham's sons, were wicked and cursed by God, but the Lord was working with them, and his patience had not run out. However, when their sin and unrepentance had gone long enough, God would use the Israelites to punish them. Abraham might be thinking, all right, I took care of business here. I got Lot back. Maybe I should do some more. Maybe God will call me to clean up this land a bit more and make it my own. But the Lord is saying, no, it's not going to quite work out that way. I'm giving you this land, but think like 400 years. You're going to have the descendants, and they're going to be as numerous as the stars, but that's not going to exactly happen in the next 70 years. Think 400 years. So, in that context, it really kind of makes sense. The Lord is telling Abraham this promise is going to be fulfilled over time. So, let's jump into it and do ask questions as we go along. So, question 1, what did God command Abram to do? And what did this mean? Yeah, Joan?
He commanded them to make the sacrifice of the goat and the birds and the ram and the heifer. And I suspect that is because his descendants will be all kinds of people and all different levels, that they've got the different animals, including poor people. Why the birds?
Okay. I think that's a good example of allegorizing. You ever heard that term? Like you're looking at the text and you're thinking this seems symbolic of the future here. And allegorizing you always have to be careful with. You can't say it's doctrinal truth. There's probably a more, I'll say more better thought on that though. And we wouldn't know this off the top of our heads per se, but I think the Bible talks about it, like culturally, like the Babylonians and such. They would have made agreements like this, In America, what do? We go in front of a notary and we sign in front of the notary, and the notary stamps it, and then it's a deal, right? It is a document that is established by the parties and the lawyers and the notary. This seems to be what the Babylonians and Abraham living in their land would be using. The Babylonians aren't around yet, but this is kind of the early setup of these promises that would be made later. They would sacrifice different animals, and I can't speak to why there's such a variety here, but they sacrifice these animals, and then they would walk between the animals to symbolize that, this is my half of the agreement, and this is your half of the agreement, and it's done. I think in the Bible we have different things like this. We have Isaac, put your hand underneath my thigh, and I'm going to give you the blessing, right? That doesn't really culturally translate so well. There's Daniel and the lion's den. We have the law of the Medes and the Persians, and it can't be revoked. This is kind of Abraham's version with God. There's this sacrifice, and you walk through. So it's not necessarily. I don't think we should see it as like a worship sacrifice. And I think that's where we tend to go every time Abraham sacrifices something. We're thinking he's praising God. Certainly, there's a part of that here, but it's almost more of a civil kind of thought here. But anyway, Wayne, you have a comment?
In the Middle East somewhere, they would close a commercial deal by exchanging or holding someone else's sandal.
Oh,
By exchange of sandals or holding the sandals, that
Is-
closed the deal.
what time frame is are you thinking?
It was in
Yeah.
Ruth, it's in the story of Ruth with Boaz, the sandal thing with the
Oh, yeah.
transaction at the gate, there's that thing.
That's
Thank you, Sharon.
I remember that, yeah.
I'm just thinking of the Arabs throwing sandals at Bush.
Oh, no. Yeah, I remember that.
I think it was it over in the Middle East or
Yeah, that was an insult.
right? Yeah, Adrian.
I have an interesting note. I have the EHV Bible, and it's not the commentary; it's just the regular
Sure.
one. But it says for verse 18, it says the Hebrew expression for "make a covenant" is literally "cut a covenant." Perhaps this is a reflection of the cutting of the animals.
Yeah. Covenant is a
Right, so God was making a covenant with these people, and
Yeah.
that's what, or with Abraham. That's the meaning of, I would think.
yeah. So yeah. Another thought?
No, I just happened to look up the Ruth one, I'll just read it here. In Israel, this used to be the custom regarding the transfer of the right of redemption. To confirm every transfer, one man took off his sandal, gave it to the other party. This is the way of ratifying a transfer in Israel, so it's a transfer and agreement or whatever.
So it meant agreement, it meant a covenant, it meant it was sealed. You know, God continues to reedify and solidify this promise to Abraham of being a blessing to all nations and being a great nation. Under the normal conditions, Abraham would have walked together with God between the pieces of the animal sacrifices, sacrificial animals. However, what does Abraham do when this covenant is being ratified?
Falls asleep. Was asleep. Yeah, he slept.
Yeah. The sun was going down, he fell asleep. So I would take this literally, and then like it seems like verses 8 through 11 is literally happening. Right? He has made the sacrifice. He has separated the animals, and then the next part where God is speaking is through a vision in his sleep. So it sounds like some people might think the whole thing happened in his sleep. That kind of confuses me. I think sometimes Hebrew has a way of telling you something and then giving you the broader context. So I guess I won't say it's wrong that maybe all of this happened in his sleep in a vision. But I don't know, that was just something I came across in some commentaries and such. And I'm like, well, that could be. So it's okay. So he fell asleep, and yeah.
What does the terrifying deep darkness fell on him? What do they make of that? I mean,
Good question. What is
for a
the
human,
deep
you could say
darkness?
it would be like a bad dream or something came upon him, you know, a nightmare kind of thing, but God evidently speaks to him.
I think that's just describing the fact that this is just not a normal sleep. You know, that this is something different than having a dream and God talking. Well, it is like a dream where God talks to you type of thing, but it's you know, doesn't Paul say, you know, I was caught up into the third heavens and this is what I saw, and it's almost like there's dreams where God talks to people, and then there are things that are like even more so, like you are in the dream or you are with God, and it seems like that. Like this seems like, you know, you are in this other dimension type of thought, you know. And I think that's maybe the point here. Yeah, that's my best interpretation of it. Because it wouldn't, deep darkness, yeah, usually we think deep darkness covers the people, right? It's a phrase to say this is sinful and this is not good. But I would say here it's more about this is different. Yeah, Susan?
Portion about the flaming torch, People's Bible says, during the centuries of Old Testament, God often appeared to his people in fire, smoke, or in a cloud to assure the people of his burning determination to carry out his great plan for them. So, in the case of Moses and other cases also. So they're making reference to that as part of the burning torch.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, there's numerous instances where God appears through some sort of fire, whether it's the pillar of fire in the wilderness leading them, or Moses in the burning bush. Here you have a torch.
And also it says that Abraham had asked God for a sign and God gave him the flaming torch, symbolizing the very presence of God. Because he asked him, when the agreement is made, it has to be made between two people, and only Abram was there.
Right. Yeah, more about that promise in a moment. Question 3. God had promised Abraham the land, yet the promise would be fulfilled in the future. What had to happen before Abraham's descendants took the land?
400 years of slavery.
You're right. 400 years of slavery.
But
Go ahead.
the commentary that I read talked about that they would then come out with great possessions because they had that opportunity to accrue lots of people, land, animals, and so on. So they were actually being blessed, even in slavery.
Yeah. Right, so this is foreshadowing the Exodus. Definitely. Right? This is going to have to happen first. John?
During the Exodus, God had told them to ask for things from
Yes.
their neighbors.
Yeah.
And their neighbors were glad to get rid of them and
Yeah.
gave them all they wanted so that they would go out with a spoil, so to speak.
Sure, all of that came into play. Yeah.
And this is interesting too. Like we'll later talk about the Exodus and the conquering of the Promised Land, and I think sometimes even myself might think like, boy, God is really cleaning house here. Is this really fair? Those people of Jericho, those people of Ai, and this is a good reminder that God was patient with those people in Israel. We'll call them the natives. He was patient with them for 400 years, right? And he's letting their account build up, so to speak, right? He's letting their sins build up to the point where the judgment will be the new nation of Israel coming and taking that land away. And don't feel so bad maybe for the people of Jericho that are going about their business and then their wall comes crashing down. God had been patient with them. God had sent messengers and prophets and ancestors that had been rejected. So in God's mind, it wasn't like, well, you're just inconveniently here. No, these people are children of Abraham too, just on the other side, so to speak. They've rejected the Lord. So
it's kind of, in a rural area like this, I mean, in a farming or they must have realized, that these Jewish people were different. I mean, their crops probably grew better. Their animals multiply better, and pretty soon you'd have to say, as an outsider, there's something about them, that is different.
Oh yeah. I mean, modern day, I would compare them to almost like the Amish.
Yeah.
Like they're growing beards and they're not worshiping the idols that we worship. They don't seem to be so culturally engaged. Yeah, definitely perks an eyebrow. That's a Hebrew, right? That's an Amish person. I can spot them a mile away. And a lot of that is their laws and such. I mean, they're taking their laws seriously because God gave them the law, and not Hammurabi or somebody else. So, yeah. So, 4. What is the difference? What is different about this covenant described in verses 17 to 21 and ordinary covenants between two people? In parentheses there it says, this is important to us today, too, when we consider God's covenant with us. And this question, maybe the answer doesn't really jump out at you, but
Well, it's all God's one-sided.
it is, right?
It's all I'm gonna do for you, and He's not demanding anything back.
Okay. So, again, here's kind of this, is this in the real world? Is this in a vision state? Regardless, it is this torch. It is this fire pot. It's God passing between these sacrifices, not Abraham. So it's a one-way covenant. That's the big key here. It's not like Abraham, now we're going to go through this together. We got the notary here. It's both sign. No, it's got the notary here, and I'm going to sign. And that's going to become important, because if this was a two-sided agreement where Abraham had to keep up his side, he's not going to be faithfully trusting in this promise as he should. God is going to be faithful to him more than he can imagine. So, question, comments?
It reminds me of the prodigal son. That when the father's talking to the oldest boy, he's saying, "All this is yours. I'm giving this all to you. I'm not asking anything from you. This is all yours. You should be glad your brother's back." It's a one-way deal.
Yeah.
You know it's all yours.
And I think it comes at, God's timing is always perfect, but it comes at a really important time. He's at a crossroads. He's back in the land after being blessed in Egypt. He's getting older. He's just fought a battle. Now it's time to refocus and assure him of this promise. Of course, what's he going to turn around and do? Chapter 16 we'll talk about in a minute. So, just the apply question there. Abraham needed assurance that God would fulfill his promises. God's word would have been enough, but God deals with us in our weaknesses and gives us visible assurances of his faithfulness. What visible assurances has God given you? Great question. Kathleen?
Well, I thought about it. I just came up with, he's given us the Lord's Supper, he's given us baptism, and he's given us the written word. Sometimes we think, if only I'd been alive then, I would believe, but it's all in front of us now.
Yeah, the means of grace. Word and sacraments, aren't they the way God has made his covenant promise with us? And they don't depend on they don't depend on us, right? The same supper is given to all of us, regardless of our faithfulness in the recent past or distant past. It's a one-way agreement. He's died. He forgives us in baptism as well. Sharon.
Not for me, but I'm reminded of other people in the Bible who needed a visible sign of assurance. Hezekiah was met with the sun going down the stairs that he was going to be okay, and Gideon with the fleeces, and actually Thomas needed assurance that Jesus had to visibly show him the signs on his body. That thing about in our weaknesses, God is willing to give us visible assurances for our faith.
Right. That was, why I wanted to read the first part of the chapter again too. Abraham is in a place of doubt. My body is old. I don't have an heir yet, and here you go. And I guess he could have said count the stars and leave it there, but he wanted to do more. Jesus could have said, Thomas, I'm talking to you, but I'm not going to let you touch me. Yeah. So, good to ask for signs, but certainly, don't attest the Lord either. Right? I think when we ask for blessings, we're asking the Lord for signs, aren't we? When we ask Him to heal and to help and to guide. Those are signs today that we pray for a lot. And those are pleasing to God. Well, let's have a page turn or a book turn here, chapter 16. Titled, Abraham Tries to Fulfill the Promise Himself. We'll defend him a little bit here, but not too much. So, looking at just a few verses we're going to read here, Sarah says, go sleep with my maidservant. Although this was not right, it was a custom in that day. As much as we know that the Israelites were a different people, they still did pick up things that they shouldn't have. You're the wealthy man of the house, and you have no heir. You need an heir, right? This is not corporate America where you have, the next three guys vying for the title of CEO of the family business here. It's a concern. All right, the angel of the Lord. So note that the angel says, so the angel is going to come to Hagar. Note that the angel says, what the angel says. This makes it clear that this is God Himself. Since this person is called the angel of the Lord, it is clear that he is a unique person, distinct from the Lord. Yet he is the Lord. So this is our first appearance of Jesus in chapter 16. I should say first appearance in the sense of He's going to speak. So we know he's in Genesis, but we know that later. I digress. At verse 16, Abraham was 86 years old. And it would be 14 more years before Abraham and Sarah's son Isaac would be born. So he's got some time, even after this, we'll call it incident. I'll read it there. Hagar and Ishmael. So now Sarai, Abraham's wife, bore no children for him. She had a servant girl, an Egyptian, whose name was Hagar. Sarai said to Abram, "See now, the Lord has prevented me from bearing children. Please go to my servant girl. It may be that I can build up a family through her." Abram listened to the voice of Sarai. After Abram had lived 10 years in the land of Canaan, Sarai, Abram's wife, took her servant girl Hagar the Egyptian and gave her to her husband Abram to be his wife. He went to Hagar and she conceived. When she saw that she had conceived, she looked down on her mistress. Sarai said to Abram, "This wrong that I am suffering is on account of you. I gave my servant girl into your embrace, and when she saw that she had conceived, she looked down on me. May God judge between me and you." But Abram said to Sarai, "Look, your servant girl is in your hands. Do to her whatever seems good to you." Sarai dealt harshly with her, and she fled from her presence. The angel of the Lord found Hagar beside a flowing spring in the wilderness, beside the spring on the way to Shur. He said, "Hagar, servant girl of Sarai, where did you come from? Where are you going?" She said, "I am fleeing from the presence of my mistress Sarah." The angel of the Lord said to her, "Return to your mistress and submit to her authority." The angel of the Lord said to her, "I will greatly multiply your descendants, so that they will be too many to count." The angel of the Lord said to her, "Listen, you are expecting a child and will give birth to a son. You shall name him Ishmael, because the Lord has heard your affliction. He will be a wild donkey of a man. His hand will be against every man, and every man's hand against him. He will dwell in hostility toward all of his brothers." She called the name of the Lord who spoke to her, quote, "You are a God who sees." For she said, "Here I have really seen him. Who sees me?" Therefore, the well was called Beer Lahai Roi. It is right there between Kadesh and Bered. Hagar gave birth to a son for Abram. Abram named his son, whom Hagar bore, Ishmael. Abram was 86 years old when Hagar bore Ishmael. All right, some drama. You thought it was just going to be on the soaps later this afternoon. Nope. Here, Genesis 16. Dave's like, "I don't watch soaps."
No, I always hate going into a doctor's office and they have the view.
I think they canceled The View, by the way.
I've gotten up a couple of times and asked them to change channel.
Yeah, they'll find something just even worse to put on, I'm sure. Well, question one. Let's dive in. So the Bible portrays believers as they really are. Real saints and real sinners at the same time. Name at least 4 simple traits that manifest themselves in the activity described in the first 6 verses of chapter 16. All right, tell me what isn't good. Even if it's not in the first 6 verses, I won't scold you. What isn't good?
I'm sorry, what isn't,
What are the sins that are racking up really quickly here?
okay, they're talking about the sinful traits,
Simple traits, yep.
like complaining and being capricious and unbelief.
So we'll start with the unbelief. Who's unbelief?
Sarah.
Yeah, both Sarah and Abram, both.
Yeah, it starts with Sarah, I suppose. And Abraham doesn't push back. He's not like Sarah. We need to stay the course and trust that the Lord will keep his promise. And then you said, I'm sorry, you said also victory?
Yeah, I thought the capriciousness of, Sarah gives Hagar, and then when Hagar gets pregnant, she's snotty about it. I thought, well, all right, honey, what did you expect, I thought she was very complaining. And also what the unkindness, the horrid unkindness that she did to her servant. I mean, did she ask to have the master come into her? I'm guessing probably not. And then having to bear a child as well. And Sarah's response was very unkind and
So,
thoughtless and rude.
so it may be reminiscent of David a little bit, right? David caused a problem and he made it worse. Sarah and Abraham, they sinned and then they start making it worse, right? Treating her poorly, or she's running out into the desert. I mean, even the Lord is like, this isn't cool, So in that case, the Lord is not showing he's showing compassion on what Hagar's going through. Yeah.
I was trying to just think, well, what are sinful traits?
Oh, sure.
Because that's the question.
The sinful traits, yeah. Yeah, Susan?
She actually blames God for not having a child.
What?
And then she starts concocting all of this, taking it on herself rather than, the unbelief that you were talking about.
Right.
So there's a simple trait, right? You are expecting some blessing or something to go differently, and then when it doesn't, well, God must have just
Blaming.
God must have changed his mind or something. And I think there's the question for me a little bit is Sarai in this place of this is ridiculous. I don't believe that God's going to keep this promise. Or is she kind of maybe God's pushing me in us in a different direction, and this is the direction we should go. And so I don't want to. I have trouble painting Sarah because in a totally negative light. I mean, she does want this promise to be kept. She does want an ancestor. Is she influenced by the culture around her to the point where she's thinking, if God said the lady in her 70s was going to have a kid, he would have told us specifically, and he didn't, So that trait of God helps those who help themselves, in my mind, might be part of this too, right? God is... Okay, let's just get real. If God wants us to have children, what's that going to mean? How do I start helping this process along? You might have asked and hoped that they would have been praying about this a bit more, or maybe they were, but it's not referenced. So there's some context we don't know, but definitely, it's at least a bit of both. It's a bit of both. Or God's going to help those who help themselves, or we're just moving on. Wayne?
It's in a way usurping what Abraham's role is rather than and trying to put her instead. And it reminds me of the mother of Jacob and Esau when she saw that Isaac, whoever, then Esau was going to get the blessing going out to get a buck and coming home, then manipulated the thing so it ended up that Jacob would get it and then have to beat it to Uncle Laban to save his neck. It's reminiscent of that too. Stepping out of your role, and that was none of her business to do in the first place. And I'll have to solve this for God.
Yeah. So when Rebecca says, I want you to have the blessing and not Esau to her son Jacob. Yeah. So we have numerous instances where the ladies are just like the men, aren't they? They're sinning or showing the weakness of their faith. But God's going to navigate that to keep his promises. John?
But God had told Jacob or Esau or Isaac and Rebekah that the older would serve the younger. And so she knew that already, Rebecca. So she may have been doing her part to make sure that happened.
Yeah, well, I'll have to table that discussion a little bit. Sorry, but yeah, I mean, we'll come to that discussion too. I think the commentator of the People's Bible, Jessica, mentions that the promise did not mention that it would come from Sarah, but it came from Abraham. So is part of this her, backing herself out of this, right? It was with your seed, Abraham. It wasn't with mine. And, again, you're declared guilty, but maybe we'll lower your sentence, Sarah, a little bit. Kind of thought here. Like, it's not God pleasing for him to go outside of this marriage. That's totally wrong, but we can see your point there that there was nothing in the promise so far where she was specifically mentioned. So did that play a part of it? Again, this is why the soap operas take all afternoon. I mean, it's complicated a little bit,
But
but it's undefensible, of course. How is this going to play out?
But in the end, it makes it worse because it ends up that we now have the Arabs killing Jews even to this day.
Sure. So, yeah, how do you want to take the wild donkey comment? I think, his hand will be against every man and every hand against him. Hostility towards his brother. So even when the Jews do come back to the promised land and the Arabs are there, or or their descendants, or the Kenites, the Canaanites, the Hittites, I mean, none of them like each other, right? It's not like they're breaking up a great, strong, cohesive nation of peaceful people. So this is what we're going to see when they come back in 400 years, plus, kind of the world we still have today. But I don't know if I'll go say much more than that. So some of the traits or the sins, their lack of faith, they're going to take matters into their own hands. Abraham had an affair, and then, even after she said to do that, she starts blaming him. So part of us could be like Abraham. Did you really think this was going to work out? Living like your neighbors, and so neither here nor there. But she's a young Egyptian slave girl. Gosh, this isn't. Just not good. Not good when the old man runs off with the younger woman, right? And then even they're not even the same nationality,
But his wife told him.
Shouldn't do everything your wife tells you to do. That's the moral of the story. All right. And you shouldn't do everything your husband lets you do. That's there too, right? My husband lets me do it. That doesn't mean it's a good thing either.
I think Eve gave the apple to Adam. Adam didn't have to take the apple, but so it all started from that.
Yeah. Yep. Does remind you of that too, right? Abraham could have been a more godly man and leader. Well, the angel of the Lord found Hagar. This is the golden nugget here, the silver lining. Cool to see the angel of the Lord. How is this verse a great comfort to us? How is it a great comfort to us that angel of the Lord comes to Hagar? Sharon?
I think the word found, you could also use the angel of the Lord saw Hagar. He saw her. He saw her needs and needed to bring her comfort and bring her back. And that's comforting to us too, that he does see us, even though sometimes we feel that we've been abandoned, like Hagar probably felt suddenly abandoned too. And in our lowest state, he sees us.
Yeah. And again, do you get the impression, like I do, that Hagar is not really? I mean, she's in the household, but I don't think she really buys into the faith yet of Abraham. Right? It almost seems like this is a whole new kind of thought for her, you know. So you just get that impression that, at least I do, when she says, "You're a God who sees." I just wonder if, you know, you're in the household. Abraham has his God. They're talking about these promises and such. You know, maybe it's even explained to her. You know, we want you to have a child because Abraham's going to be a great nation. God promised, and now this is becoming her faith, right? Now this is her God, perhaps. I kind of lean that way a bit, and why? Because he sees her. He's found her in this time of need.
It's almost like the angel of the Lord, we're defining that as Jesus. And it's almost like Jesus brought it home. All right, this is it, and brought the faith home to her.
Was Hagar the first person Jesus converted? We might just have read that, right? It's amazing.
Yeah, because then in the next question actually should have gone together, I think, with the second one. She then confessed her faith. She turned right around and said, "I have seen him who looks after me."
Yeah, and she's going to name a place, right? Bear Lahai Roy. Yeah. John.
I think Abraham probably had his staff meetings with all of his servants and regularly talked about God to them. Because, like the gentleman that he sent to find Isaac a wife, and he was praying along the way, that guy believed.
Yeah.
In this one, the EHV, it says, "Have I really seen him who sees me?" So there's still some doubt in this translation.
So
Well, you know, have I really seen the Grand Canyon? I suppose there's some expression of kind of shock, maybe. I don't know, when she names the place, that kind of tells me that she's not doubting as much as maybe I think it's the expression. Have I seen really the real Wayne Newton? Am I really in the presence of the Super Bowl winning quarterback?
So which
I would think maybe
translation says that?
it is, yeah, maybe an exclamation point more than it is a question. But again, I think maybe we could leave that to a Hebrew scholar a little bit.
Which translation says it that way, Wayne?
This is the EHV, the new one from the publishing house.
So that's verse
Could be
Verse
a 13.
in 13. She
Because,
said, here have I really seen him who sees me, therefore the well was called B or whatever.
Yeah.
We're not told what that means, I don't know what that means.
but maybe they just, it was more of an exclamatory way of saying it. Did they put a question mark?
Yes, I think it's
Wow.
actually,
It's more of an
quite-
exclamation
I-
rather than a
So-
question.
So yeah, there is always
Yeah.
there was no exclamation points or question marks in Hebrew. So the editor has to make that call.
Yeah, I think it
It's
was
sort of
bad.
like, it is common though, did I really see what I see? I
Yeah.
mean, somebody throws a Hail Mary at the last second and
Yeah.
they catch it. Did I really see that? I think that
It's an exclamation, not really a question.
Yeah. So the EHV will go more literal.
We'd have to ask
And,
Dr. Brook, I can ask him this afternoon.
Yeah. Yeah.
The name means well of the living one.
Well, the living one. Yeah.
Thank you.
Well,
Well of the living one.
nevertheless,
Thank you.
if Hagar's not in heaven, I think we're going to be surprised. I think
Lois
she's
knows what the meaning of B or whatever is. Lois, you wanna share that?
Yes, in the New International Version, it says at the bottom that the name means the well of the living one who sees me.
Well,
And
that's
Beer La Hahu means well of the living one who sees me.
That sounds like a faith expression.
And
So
but
well,
the thing about Hebrew is there's no text before this that they compare the language to, so they're probably looking back up 2 verses to explain this verse. So that's always the thing too. Like, when we translate something in the New Testament, we have a lot of Greek words to look at and compare. How is this Greek word used? And then in Hebrew, we don't have that. I mean, the oldest. If you want to read ancient Hebrew, this is it. I mean, you have to go to Exodus and see how the word was used, and come back, type of thing. So anyway, Adrian.
Well, I guess if she's Egyptian, you'd have to think about what she would be used to, like, what would she used to worshiping? She's used to worshiping statues and many gods, and, she's not used to that kind of interaction.
So she's not used to a personal God. Is that what
Yeah,
you're?
right, yeah.
I think that's a really valid point, right? I mean, the gods are so up here in that culture, whereas, God would come down and care about me. Yeah. Well, briefly, at the end of verse 2, Moses says, Abraham agreed to what Sarah said, discussed why men sometimes agree with their wives to do something wrong. Lack of leadership, or it's the path of least resistance always, right? I mean, why do women sometimes agree with what men say is wrong? Well, it's just easier sometimes, right? So, I don't want to put that can of worms anymore. Is this prophecy? Oh, here's the other one. Here's another one. I'm glad we don't have time. Does this prophecy still ring true today in the world? The editor says the Arab peoples are well described in the angel's words to Hagar. So kind of to Wayne's point, they are too many to count. Her descendants are too many to count still today. And culturally, they haven't figured things out either. But we can say because of sin, there's the only people that have figured that out are the Chinese and they're communists, right? I mean, that's where do you get a billion people like not fighting each other? Well, you have a dictator and no freedom of speech. So, but anyway, yeah. So I don't want to dwell on that much too much either. And then 1 Peter 2:18. What encouragement does this verse give those who, like Hagar, are the servants of others? 1 Peter 2 talks about trusting the Lord to care for you. So even if you're in a bad government, even if you're in a bad family situation. I think that passage talks about servants and slaves. You know, you can trust that God cares for you. And God's that's gonna ring out throughout this history of God's people too, right? So even in these captivities and difficult times, prophets will say, remember that the Lord still will care for you and work things out. You know, it's not like tomorrow Hagar's family life was going to be perfect, but God would still care for her. And we know that too. In our world and with governments and in our lives with families, God can care and take care of us even under some difficult circumstances. So. There you go. 15 and 16 next time. We get to talk about the covenant of circumcision. So
God's word is our great heritage and shall be ours forever. To spread its light from age to age shall be our chief endeavor. Through life it guides our way. In death it is our stay. Lord, grant while worlds endure, we keep His teachings pure. Through